The radio crackled with static at 3:47 hours, cutting through the pre-dawn darkness like a scream. Commander Jake Morrison pressed his earpiece tighter, straining to catch the transmission from Overwatch. What came through changed everything he thought he knew about warfare, about his team, and about the quiet woman they'd all written off as dead weight. Alpha Base, this is Viper. 16 confirmed kills. I repeat, 16 KIA, advancing to secondary position. Morrison's blood turned to ice water. 16 kills. In less than 4 hours. The voice belonged to Lieutenant Kestrel Viper Thorne, the sniper he'd reluctantly accepted into his SEAL unit 3 months ago. The same woman his men whispered about in the mess hall, calling her diversity hire and the experiment. The same operator he'd personally doubted would last a week in the Hindu Kush mountains of Afghanistan. But the thermal imaging from the UAV overhead told a different story. Scattered across the valley floor lay the bodies of Taliban fighters who had been advancing on their forward operating base. Each shot placed with surgical precision. Each kill executed in complete silence. No muzzle flash. No sound signature. Just death arriving from the darkness like an angel of judgment. Morrison had commanded Navy SEALs for 12 years. He'd seen the best operators in the world work their deadly craft. But this was something else entirely. This was artistry written in blood and breathed in gunpowder. The enemy had never even known she was there. "How copy, Viper?" Morrison finally managed, his voice betraying none of the awe-building in his chest. "Solid copy, Alpha Base. Enemy advance neutralized. Recommend immediate exfil of wounded to LZ Bravo, weather window closing fast." Through his night vision scope, Morrison could see the storm clouds gathering over the peaks. In 20 minutes, the mountains would be socked in with zero visibility. Any helicopter extraction would be impossible. But somehow, this woman had seen it coming, had planned for it, had executed a perfect defensive action with time to spare. Behind him, Petty Officer Rodriguez lowered his radio with shaking hands. "Sir, that's impossible. 16 targets. The math doesn't work. Even with perfect conditions, the angles alone." "Shut it, Rodriguez." Morrison's voice carried a new edge of respect he couldn't quite explain. For months, he'd questioned the Pentagon's decision to integrate women into special operations. Tonight, one woman had just saved all their lives. As the first raindrops began to fall, Morrison realized he knew absolutely nothing about Lieutenant Kestrel Thorne, and that ignorance might have cost them everything. The mountains held their secrets close, but some truths demanded to be told. This was one of them. 6 hours earlier, the mission had seemed routine. Intelligence suggested a small Taliban cell was moving weapons through the Korangal Valley, the same deadly corridor that had claimed so many American lives it earned the nickname Valley of Death. Morrison's team was tasked with interdiction and intelligence gathering. Get in, observe, report, get out. Standard reconnaissance. What intelligence hadn't mentioned was the size of the enemy force. What looked like 6 fighters on satellite imagery turned out to be nearly 30 Taliban soldiers, heavily armed and moving with the precision of trained military units rather than ragtag insurgents. They'd walked into a hornet's nest. "Alpha Base, this is Overwatch. Count 27 tangos moving on your position from the north. Recommend immediate displacement." Morrison cursed under his breath. Their hide site was compromised, and the enemy had them outnumbered 4-1. Standard SEAL doctrine called for immediate extraction, but the storm front moving in made helicopter support impossible for the next 6 hours. They were trapped. "Viper, what's your position?" Morrison whispered into his throat mic. 800 meters northeast of your location. I have clear lines of sight to the primary approach routes." Morrison studied his tactical map. Thorne had positioned herself on a rocky outcrop that dominated the valley floor. It was exposed, dangerous, and completely cut off from friendly support. It was also tactically brilliant. From that position, she could cover their withdrawal or hold off an enemy advance indefinitely. If she was good enough. Viper, we're going to need you to provide overwatch while we displace to the alternate rally point. Can you hold that position? The pause that followed lasted 3 heartbeats too long. Morrison found himself holding his breath, wondering if he just sent a woman to her death because he'd run out of better options. Copy that, Alpha Base, I can hold. Her voice carried something Morrison had heard before in the best operators he'd served with. Not bravado or false confidence, but the quiet certainty of someone who understood exactly what was being asked and had already decided to pay whatever price the mission demanded. Through his scope, Morrison watched the Taliban fighters moving through the darkness below. They advanced with discipline, using proper spacing and cover techniques. These weren't amateurs. These were soldiers, probably former Afghan National Army who'd switched sides when the political winds changed. They moved like wolves closing in for a kill. Lieutenant Kestrel Thorne settled behind her rifle and felt the familiar calm descend over her like a comfortable blanket. At 28, she'd been shooting competitively since age 12, when her father, a Marine Corps gunnery sergeant, first handed her a .22 caliber rifle on their ranch outside Amarillo. By 16, she was out shooting grown men at regional competitions. By 22, she'd graduated from the Marine Corps Scout Sniper School as the honor graduate in her class. The Barrett M82, a 1.50 caliber rifle cradled against her shoulder, felt like an extension of her body. 57 inches of precision-engineered depth that could reach out and touch targets at distances exceeding 2,000 meters. But tonight, she wouldn't need the Barrett's extreme range. Tonight would be close work. Through her Schmidt and Bender scope, she watched the Taliban fighters advance through the valley. They moved in a tactical formation she recognized from her time training Afghan forces before the withdrawal. Someone down there knew what they were doing. Someone had taught them proper small unit tactics. The wind was steady at 4 miles per hour from the west, temperature holding at 42 degrees Fahrenheit, humidity at 68%, all factors that would affect bullet trajectory over long distances. Thorne calculated the corrections automatically, the mathematics of death as familiar to her as breathing. The lead Taliban fighter was carrying a PKM machine gun, the same Russian-made weapon that had killed her brother Marcus in Helmand Province 3 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on her. Tonight, she'd use that man's advance to honor Marcus's memory. She breathed in slowly, letting her heart rate settle to its resting rhythm of 58 beats per minute. Exhaled half the air from her lungs and held the rest. Found her natural respiratory pause where her body was completely still. The crosshairs settled on the machine gunner's chest, 837 meters, an easy shot for someone of her caliber. Thorne squeezed the trigger with steady, even pressure until the Barrett spoke with its distinctive thunderclap. The .50 caliber round covered the distance in just over a second, arriving with devastating effect. The machine gunner dropped instantly, his weapon clattering across the rocks. 1 down, 26 to go. The Taliban fighters immediately took cover, but their discipline held. Instead of breaking and running, they began moving in coordinated teams toward her position, professional soldiers adapting to contact. This was going to be interesting. Morrison watched through his night vision as chaos erupted in the valley below. The Taliban fighters had responded to Thorne's first shot with textbook precision, immediately establishing a base of fire while assault teams began flanking movements toward her position. These weren't the usual suspects they'd been fighting for the past decade. Alpha Base, this is Viper. Count 26 remaining hostiles. They're advancing in 3 teams. Professional movement. Recommend you begin displacement now. Her voice remained steady, clinical. If she was concerned about being outnumbered 26 to 1, it didn't show in her tone. Morrison had seen seasoned operators crack under less pressure. Copy, Viper. What's your ammunition status? Sufficient for current engagement. The understatement would have been amusing under different circumstances. Morrison knew she was carrying 40 rounds for the Barrett and approximately 200 rounds for her M4 carbine. Against 26 trained fighters, that was cutting it close. The second shot came 90 seconds after the first. Another Taliban fighter dropped, this one carrying an RPG-7 rocket launcher. 812 meters, moving target, taken while the man was sprinting between cover positions. The round took him center mass, spinning him around before he collapsed behind a boulder. "Jesus Christ," whispered Petty Officer Davis, Morrison's senior enlisted man. "Did you see that shot?" Morrison had seen it. What impressed him more was Thorne's target selection. She wasn't just shooting randomly at enemy fighters. She was systematically eliminating the weapons that posed the greatest threat to their extraction. First the machine gun that could suppress their movement, then the RPG that could destroy their vehicle. She was fighting smart. The Taliban fighters adapted quickly to her presence. They began using smoke grenades to obscure their movement, advancing by fire teams while others provided covering fire. Professional tactics executed with military precision. Someone down there had extensive training, possibly from a foreign military advisor. But Thorne adapted too. Her third shot punched through a smoke screen and found its target based on muzzle flash and sound signature alone. 904 meters through artificial concealment. Impossible shot by any reasonable standard. Unless you were one of the best snipers the United States military had ever produced. Morrison was beginning to realize that's exactly what Lieutenant Kestrel Thorne was. The Taliban commander crouched behind a truck-sized boulder, his radio pressed against his ear as he barked orders in Pashto. 34 years old, formerly a captain in the Afghan National Army before defecting to the Taliban 2 years ago, Rashid Ahmadzai had fought Americans before. He understood their tactics, their capabilities, their weaknesses. But he'd never encountered anything like this. 3 of his best fighters were dead, each killed by a single shot from impossible distances. No follow-up rounds, no adjustment shots, just one bullet, one kill. The sniper was either incredibly lucky or incredibly skilled. Rashid had survived too many firefights to believe in luck. "Mahmoud, take your team left along the ridge. Farid, advance straight up the center draw. I'll take my men right along the stream bed. We'll bracket the sniper's position and advance simultaneously." His radio crackled with acknowledgments from his team leaders. 23 fighters remained, more than enough to overwhelm a single American shooter. The key was coordination. Move fast, present multiple targets, close the distance before the sniper could react. Rashid had learned these tactics from American Special Forces advisors during his time in the Afghan army. Tonight, he'd use their own methods against them. He raised his hand, preparing to signal the assault, when the fourth shot rang across the valley. Mahmoud's voice cut off mid-transmission. Through his binoculars, Rashid could see his lieutenant's body sprawled behind a rock formation 700 meters away. The American was reading his tactical movements, anticipating his plans. Somehow, she knew where he was sending his men before they got there. This was no ordinary soldier. Rashid keyed his radio again, switching to the emergency frequency. He used to communicate with his foreign advisor, a man whose identity he'd never learned but whose tactical expertise had kept them alive through numerous encounters with American forces. "This is Desert Wolf. I need immediate support. We have encountered an American sniper of exceptional capability, requesting guidance." The response came in accented English. "Describe the engagement." 4 kills at distances exceeding 700 meters. Single shots, no misses. Target selection indicates advanced tactical knowledge. This is not a typical American soldier. A pause, then, You have encountered what the Americans call a precision marksman, possibly special operations trained. Standard assault tactics will not work. You must force her to move from her prepared position. Rashid nodded, understanding immediately. As long as the sniper maintained her current hide, she held all the advantages. Elevation, concealment, prepared fields of fire. But if he could force her to abandon that position. Fire the mortars at grid 327419. Maximum rate of fire. His mortar team had been waiting in reserve, their 80 tomb tubes already plotted on likely American positions. 20 rounds of high explosive would force any sniper to either move or die. Time to even the odds. Thorne heard the distinctive thump of mortar tubes firing and immediately began calculating impact points based on the sound signature. 3 tubes, firing at maximum elevation, approximately 1,200 meters south of her position. Time of flight would be 38 seconds. She had already identified 3 alternate shooting positions during her initial reconnaissance. Standard sniper doctrine called for preparing multiple hides to avoid exactly this situation. The Taliban were learning, adapting their tactics to counter her advantages. Good, she'd been worried this might be too easy. The first mortar round impacted 60 meters from her position, close enough to shower her with rock fragments but not close enough to cause serious damage. The second and third rounds bracketed her hide, indicating the enemy had a good general idea of her location. Time to move. Thorne slung the Barrett across her back and began her tactical withdrawal to the secondary position. She prepared 400 meters to the east. The movement would take her 6 minutes through broken terrain, during which time the Taliban fighters would advance unopposed. She'd planned for that too. Before abandoning her primary hide, Thorne activated the remote detonator for the improvised explosive device she'd placed along the most likely avenue of approach. 12 ounces of composition C4 wrapped around a fragmentation sleeve made from aircraft cable. Not enough to cause serious structural damage, but plenty to discourage aggressive movement through the kill zone. As she low-crawled through the rocks toward her secondary position, Thorne could hear the Taliban fighters beginning their assault. They moved with the confidence of soldiers who believed they'd suppressed their opponent. Their voices carried clearly in the thin mountain air, allowing her to track their positions by sound. Professional soldiers, but not professional enough to maintain noise discipline during a night assault. The IED detonated as the first fire team reached the base of her original position. The explosion lit up the valley like daylight for 3 seconds, long enough for Thorne to see 7 Taliban fighters silhouetted against the rocks. She memorized their positions automatically, her tactical mind already calculating angles and distances for her next engagement. The screaming that followed the explosion told her the device had found its mark. 2 fighters down, possibly 3. The remainder would be disoriented, night vision compromised by the flash, ears ringing from the overpressure. Perfect conditions for a sniper to resume her work. Thorne settled into her secondary position and reacquired her targets through the Schmidt and Bender scope. The Taliban fighters were regrouping, tending to their wounded, preparing for a more cautious advance. She wouldn't give them the chance. Morrison's team had covered nearly half the distance to their extraction point when the explosion lit up the mountainside behind them. The blast echoed off the valley walls like thunder, followed by the unmistakable sounds of men in pain and confusion. "Viper, report." Morrison's voice carried more urgency now. The explosion meant close contact, possibly hand-to-hand combat. "Viper copies, displaced to alternate position. Enemy casualties from defensive measures. Continuing engagement." Defensive measures. Morrison almost smiled despite their circumstances. Only a professional soldier would describe an improvised explosive device as a defensive measure. Thorne was revealing herself to be far more than the token female operator he'd initially assumed. His radio earpiece crackled again. Alpha Base, this is Overwatch. We're tracking multiple heat signatures converging on Viper's last known position. Count 18-20 hostiles still mobile. 18 fighters. Still outnumbered, but the odds were improving. Morrison found himself genuinely impressed by Thorne's tactical acumen. She wasn't just shooting targets of opportunity. She was conducting a deliberate defense, using terrain and prepared positions to multiply her effectiveness. It was textbook special operations, warfare executed by someone who clearly understood the principles at an advanced level. "Sir," Rodriguez whispered, pointing toward the valley floor with his night vision scope. "Movement on the eastern ridge. Looks like a flanking force." Morrison adjusted his own optics and confirmed the sighting. A team of Taliban fighters was moving parallel to their route of advance, clearly attempting to cut off their escape route. If they reached the extraction point first, Morrison's team would be trapped between two enemy forces. He was about to call for close air support when Thorne's voice came over the radio again. "Alpha Base, I have eyes on the eastern flanking force. 6 personnel with light machine gun. Do you want me to engage?" Morrison paused. Engaging the flanking force would reveal Thorne's new position to the main Taliban element. She'd be trading her tactical advantage to protect his team's escape route. It was exactly what any SEAL in her position would do. "Viper, you are cleared to engage targets of opportunity. Use your best judgment." "Roger, engaging." The fifth shot came from a completely different direction, confirming that Thorne had successfully displaced to her alternate position. The Taliban fighter carrying the machine gun dropped instantly, his weapon tumbling down the rocky slope. Professional shooting, professional tactics, professional sacrifice for the sake of the mission. Morrison was beginning to understand why the Pentagon had been willing to integrate women into special operations units. Some of them were better than the men. Rashid Ahmadzai watched his carefully planned assault disintegrate before his eyes. The American sniper had anticipated his flanking movement, countered his mortar attack, and was now systematically destroying his remaining forces with precision he'd never encountered in 2 decades of warfare. 11 fighters dead, 7 wounded. His unit was combat ineffective by any reasonable military standard. Standard doctrine called for immediate withdrawal to preserve remaining forces. But Rashid had specific orders regarding American Special Operations Forces. No survivors, no prisoners, no one left to report what they'd seen in this valley. His radio crackled with the voice of his foreign advisor. "Desert Wolf, what is your situation?" "Casualties approaching 50%. The American sniper has proven more capable than anticipated." "Understood. Reinforcements are en route. Hold your position and continue the engagement." Reinforcements. Rashid felt a cold smile cross his face. 2 additional Taliban units were operating in the area, approximately 40 fighters total. If he could pin down the American sniper for another 30 minutes, the reinforcements would arrive and surround her position completely. No sniper, regardless of skill level, could survive against 70 enemy fighters. He keyed his radio to the tactical frequency. "All call signs, this is Desert Wolf. Reinforcements inbound. Continue pressure on the sniper. Do not allow her to withdraw." But even as he gave the order, Rashid found himself wondering about the woman who had killed 11 of his men. In his culture, women were not warriors. They did not fight with rifles and explosives. They certainly didn't display the tactical sophistication he'd witnessed tonight. Yet here was an American woman who fought with the skill of the most elite soldiers he'd encountered. She moved like a ghost through terrain he knew intimately. She anticipated his tactics before he implemented them. She showed no fear, no hesitation, no mercy. Perhaps the Americans understood something about warfare that his culture had overlooked. Perhaps strength came in forms he'd never considered. The thought troubled him more than the casualties. If America could produce female soldiers of this caliber, what did that say about their military capabilities? What did it say about his chances of victory in this larger war? Rashid pushed the doubts aside and focused on the immediate tactical problem. Philosophy could wait. Right now, he had a sniper to kill. Thorne's ammunition situation was becoming critical. 23 rounds remaining for the Barrett, 140 for her M4 carbine. Against potentially 40 to 50 enemy fighters with reinforcements likely en route, she needed to make every shot count. More importantly, she needed to start thinking beyond the immediate tactical situation. Morrison's team was still 40 minutes from their extraction point, and the Taliban were clearly committed to preventing their escape. This wasn't a harassment attack or a probe for intelligence. This was a deliberate attempt to destroy an American Special Operations unit. Someone wanted Morrison's team dead badly enough to commit significant resources to the effort. Someone who understood their capabilities and had planned accordingly. That suggested intelligence penetration at a high level, possibly within the Afghan government or military. It also suggested this engagement was more significant than a routine reconnaissance mission gone wrong. Thorne filed the analysis away for later consideration and focused on more immediate concerns. The Taliban were regrouping for another assault, and their tactics were improving with each attempt. They'd learned to respect her capabilities and were adapting accordingly. Professional soldiers, led by someone with advanced training. Through her scope, she could see the enemy commander directing his remaining forces with hand signals. Mid-30s, confident bearing, tactical vest with Afghan National Army markings partially obscured. Former government forces, now fighting for the Taliban. Standard procedure called for targeting commanders first to disrupt enemy command and control. But killing the commander might cause the remaining fighters to break contact and withdraw, allowing Morrison's team to escape safely. Alternatively, leaving the commander alive might draw the remaining Taliban into a pursuit that would give her additional opportunities to reduce their numbers. Tactical decision point. Save ammunition and potentially end the engagement, or continue the fight to inflict maximum casualties on enemy forces. Thorne made her choice and shifted her aim to a fighter carrying an RPG launcher. The commander could live for now. The anti-tank weapon posed an immediate threat that required elimination. The Barrett's muzzle flash lit up her position for a fraction of a second, long enough for trained observers to note her location. The .50 caliber round found its target at 917 meters, disintegrating the RPG round in the launcher and creating a secondary explosion that killed 2 additional Taliban fighters. One shot, 3 kills. Sometimes the mathematics worked in her favor. But now her position was compromised again. Time to move. Morrison's radio crackled with an unfamiliar voice speaking heavily accented English. American Commander, this is Colonel Ahmadzai of the Taliban forces. You are surrounded and outnumbered. Surrender now and your deaths will be quick. Morrison keyed his microphone without hesitation. This is Commander Morrison, United States Navy. I don't negotiate with terrorists. A pause, then laughter. Commander Morrison, you misunderstand your situation. We are not terrorists. We are soldiers like you, professional military men fighting for our country's independence. Surely you can respect that. The sophistication of the response surprised Morrison. This wasn't the usual Taliban rhetoric about jihad and religious warfare. This was a professional soldier speaking to another professional soldier. If you're such professionals, why don't you wear uniforms and follow the laws of war? The same reason your CIA operatives don't wear uniforms, Commander. This is not a conventional war. It never has been. Morrison found himself oddly impressed by the Taliban commander's tactical acumen and political sophistication. Under different circumstances, he might have enjoyed debating military philosophy with the man. Unfortunately, circumstances required him to kill as many of the man's soldiers as possible. "What do you want, Colonel?" "I want you to call off your sniper. She has killed many good men tonight. Brave soldiers with families, with children. End this senseless killing, and I give you my word that you and your men will be treated according to the Geneva Convention." Morrison almost laughed. The Taliban asking for mercy because of casualties inflicted by a single American sniper. The irony was beautiful. "Counteroffer, Colonel. Withdraw your forces and allow my team to extract safely. In return, I won't call in airstrikes to turn your entire unit into crater decorations." Another pause. When the Taliban commander spoke again, his voice carried a different edge. "Commander Morrison, we have been monitoring your communications. No air support is available due to weather conditions. Your helicopter extraction has been canceled. You are alone, outnumbered, and trapped in hostile territory." Morrison's blood chilled. If the Taliban were intercepting American communications, the entire mission was compromised. Worse, it suggested they had access to American encryption protocols and frequency assignments. This was turning into something far more serious than a chance encounter with local insurgents. "Viper, did you copy that transmission?" Thorne's voice came back calm and professional. "Solid copy, Alpha Base. Be advised, I'm tracking 2 additional groups approaching from the south. Estimate 40 personnel total. 40 additional fighters." Morrison did the math quickly. His 4-man team, plus 1 sniper, against approximately 60 Taliban soldiers with professional leadership and advanced intelligence capabilities. The odds were not encouraging. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell sat in the Joint Operations Center at Bagram Airfield, watching the tactical display with growing concern. Commander Morrison's team had missed their last 2 scheduled check-ins, and the weather over the Korangal Valley was deteriorating rapidly. "Ma'am, we've lost all communication with Viper team. Last known position was here." The watch officer pointed to a spot on the digital map, approximately 12 clicks north of Fob, Michigan. Mitchell studied the display. Morrison was running a routine reconnaissance mission in an area that had been quiet for months. The intelligence briefing had indicated minimal enemy presence, maybe a few local Taliban moving small arms through the area. Nothing that should have caused a communications blackout. "What's the weather situation for helicopter operations?" "Zero visibility, ma'am. Winds gusting to 40 knots. No way to get aircraft in there for at least 6 hours." 6 hours? If Morrison's team was in trouble, they might not have 6 minutes, let alone 6 hours. Mitchell had been monitoring special operations for 8 years, first as an intelligence officer, now as the deputy commander for the Joint Special Operations Task Force. She'd seen dozens of missions go wrong, had made the difficult decisions about when to send rescue forces and when to write off teams as combat losses. But she'd never had one of her female operators in contact with enemy forces. Lieutenant Kestrel Thorne represented more than just another special operations soldier. She was proof that women could operate at the highest levels of military capability. Her success or failure would influence policy decisions about female integration in special operations for decades to come. More than that, Mitchell had personally recommended Thorne for the assignment to Morrison's unit. She'd staked her own career on the belief that gender was irrelevant in special operations, that individual capability was the only factor that mattered. If Thorne failed, if she got Morrison's team killed, Mitchell would bear responsibility for that failure. "Ma'am, we're receiving intermittent radio traffic from the target area. Appears to be combat communications." Mitchell moved to the radio console and accepted the headset from the communications sergeant. Static filled her ears, punctuated by brief moments of clarity. "Viper, 16 confirmed kills. weather window closing. 16 kills. Mitchell felt her heart rate accelerate. Either Thorne was having the engagement of her career, or the radio traffic was Taliban deception operations designed to confuse American response forces. Can you clean up that signal? Working on it, ma'am. Atmospheric conditions are interfering with long-range communications. Mitchell closed her eyes and focused on the crackling radio transmissions, trying to separate genuine American voices from possible enemy deception. Everything depended on what was really happening in that valley. Rashid's reinforcements arrived as the first gray light of dawn began illuminating the eastern peaks. 2 full platoons of Taliban fighters, all veterans of previous engagements with American forces, all personally selected for their discipline and tactical proficiency. 67 fighters total, armed with everything from AK-47 rifles to heavy machine guns and rocket-propelled grenades. More than enough combat power to overwhelm a single American sniper and her support team. The American commander had been correct about one thing. No air support was available due to weather conditions. Rashid's intelligence sources had confirmed that all American helicopter operations were grounded for at least 4 more hours. The Americans were truly alone. Commander Ahmadzai, his lieutenant, approached through the pre-dawn gloom. The reinforcements are in position. We have the Americans completely surrounded. Rashid nodded, studying the tactical map his aide had prepared. The American team was trapped in a box canyon with only one exit route, and that route was now covered by 2 machine gun teams and a mortar section. The sniper was isolated on the ridge line, cut off from her support team. Perfect conditions for a final assault. But something nagged at Rashid's tactical instincts. The American sniper had demonstrated capabilities far beyond anything he'd encountered before. She'd anticipated his movements, countered his tactics, and systematically dismantled his original assault force. Professional soldiers learned to trust their instincts, especially when those instincts had kept them alive through 20 years of warfare. Lieutenant, tell the mortar section to commence preparatory fires on the ridge line. Maximum rate of fire for 10 minutes. I want that sniper suppressed before we begin the final assault. His aide saluted and disappeared into the rocks to relay the order. Within minutes, the distinctive thump of mortar tubes echoed across the valley as high explosive rounds began impacting around the sniper's position. But even as he watched the explosions blossom across the mountainside, Rashid found himself wondering if 10 minutes of mortar fire would be enough to stop a woman who had already killed 16 of his men. American military training produced exceptional soldiers. American special operations training produced warriors who seemed almost superhuman in their capabilities. And this particular American warrior happened to be a woman who fought with the precision and tactical acumen of the most elite soldiers he'd ever encountered. Rashid keyed his radio one final time. All units commence final assault, show no mercy. But privately, he wondered who would be showing mercy to whom when this engagement finally ended. Thorne felt the first mortar rounds impacting around her position and knew the enemy commander had committed his reserves to the fight. The incoming fire was too heavy, too coordinated to be coming from the original Taliban unit. Reinforcements had arrived, probably 40 to 50 additional fighters based on the volume of fire. She was now outnumbered approximately 60 to 1. Standard military doctrine suggested immediate withdrawal when facing such overwhelming odds. Unfortunately, withdrawal wasn't an option. Morrison's team was still 30 minutes from their extraction point, and the Taliban were clearly committed to preventing their escape. If she withdrew now, the enemy would mass their forces against Morrison's team and destroy them before they could reach safety. Her mission was to provide overwatch and fire support. That mission hadn't changed just because the odds had gotten worse. Significantly worse. Thorne activated her emergency beacon, knowing that the signal would alert American forces to her situation. Not that rescue was possible under current weather conditions, but at least someone would know where to find her body if things went badly. When things went badly, she corrected herself. 67 enemy fighters against one sniper was not a sustainable tactical situation. But sustainability wasn't the objective. The objective was buying Morrison's team enough time to reach their extraction point. If she could hold the Taliban forces for 30 more minutes, her teammates would live to fight another day. That was worth dying for. The mortar barrage shifted to a new target area, indicating the enemy was walking their fires across the ridge line in an attempt to catch her in the open. Professional artillery technique executed by soldiers who understood indirect fire principles. These weren't amateur insurgents. These were trained military professionals, possibly with foreign advisors providing tactical guidance. Thorne low-crawled to her third prepared position, a natural cave formation that offered overhead protection from indirect fire. The position also provided excellent fields of fire across the primary approach, routes the Taliban would use for their final assault. 18 rounds remaining for the Barrett, 136 rounds for her M4, 2 fragmentation grenades, and 1 thermite grenade for destroying equipment if capture became imminent. Ammunition sufficient for approximately 20 minutes of sustained combat against overwhelming enemy forces. Time to make those 20 minutes count. Through her scope, Thorne could see the Taliban fighters beginning their final assault. They moved with the confidence of soldiers who believed victory was inevitable. She was about to teach them otherwise. Morrison's team reached their extraction point as the sun crested the eastern peaks, casting long shadows across the valley floor. The landing zone was a flat area barely large enough for a single helicopter, surrounded by steep cliffs that would make approach and departure extremely dangerous even under ideal conditions. Under current weather conditions, with 40-knot winds and near-zero visibility, helicopter operations were impossible. Alpha Base, this is Dustoff 62, negative on extraction at this time, weather below minimums for mountain operations. Estimate 4 hours before conditions improve. 4 hours. Morrison checked his watch. 6:47 local time. By 10:47, the Taliban would have more than enough time to surround their position and bring up heavy weapons to destroy them at their leisure. Dustoff 62, what's the minimum weather you need for extraction? Winds below 20 knots, visibility greater than 1 mile. Current conditions are winds 3-5 gusting to 40, visibility 1/4 mile in blowing snow. Morrison studied the sky. The storm showed no signs of breaking, and weather forecasts in the Hindu Kush were notoriously unreliable. They might have 4 hours. They might have 12. His radio crackled with Thorne's voice. Alpha Base, this is Viper. Enemy assault force approximately 60 personnel beginning final advance. I can delay them but not indefinitely. Recommend you prepare defensive positions. 60 enemy fighters. Morrison's team had maybe 2 hours of ammunition for sustained combat. Against those odds, their only advantages were superior individual marksmanship and the tactical high ground of the landing zone. It would have to be enough. Copy Viper, will hold this position. Continue your mission. Roger, Viper out. Morrison turned to his 3 teammates. Rodriguez, his senior petty officer with 15 years of special operations experience. Davis, his communications specialist and a veteran of 6 combat deployments. Thompson, his medic and the youngest member of the team at 24 years old. All professionals, all volunteers, all willing to die before they'd surrender to enemy forces. Gentlemen, we're about to find out what we're really made of. Spread out along the ridge line, overlapping fields of fire, make every shot count. As his men moved to their assigned positions, Morrison found himself thinking about the woman fighting alone on the mountainside above them. For months, he'd questioned her capabilities, doubted her commitment, wondered if she belonged in special operations. Tonight, she was buying their lives with her own blood. If they survived this engagement, Morrison